So it's Wednesday night, so let's jump into a Transformer Slag podcast Patreon listener question. Once again, if you want to be part of the Transformer Slag podcast Patreon and help support the podcast, let us know we're doing a half-decent job here in the Transformer world, keeping you educated and informed on everything that's going on in our beautiful hobby. Again, patreon.com/protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below to find your link to join. What does he get if you join? Gets your name in the end credit scroll at the end of every segment moving forward. Access to our exclusive Transformer Slag podcast Discord where we share lore, share deals, share all kinds of stuff. Man, Prime Day just came and passed and we shared all the links so you could get it all in one spot to save money on your hobby because paying full prices for suckers. Anyways, depending on what tier, you might also get a little something in the mail, maybe a little prize. You get access to all the giveaways that we do on the live streams. And of course, access to do the Patreon listener question. We got a Patreon listener question here. Comes from our longtime patron and Primus tier patron, Space Ghostal. Good old Space Ghostal. And Space Ghostal wants to know, can you talk about some of the oddity Transformers characters and leaders that have existed, specifically Autobot and Decepticon leaders throughout the years, like how Soundwave at one point was considered the leader of the Decepticons in a UK commercial? How about some leaders before that of even Megatron? Stick to the cartoon continuity, keep doing Prime's work, and thanks for all you do, Space Ghostal. Well, thank you, Space Ghostal, once again for all the kind words. And yeah, there's you know what? It's funny because when you get into stuff like Beast Wars and beyond, Hasbro and Takara were pretty consistent on leader characters. There was no like obscure characters on the side or weird stuff like that. There's little things here and there, maybe from the Japanese Beast Wars side of things. But overall, they were pretty consistent. There really wasn't much oddities. But man, when you go into those G1 days when they weren't sure what the hell was going on half of the time, a lot of that stuff does come up. A lot of it does come up indeed. And so we're going to jump into some of those. Again, you said cartoon continuity. So we'll stick to that specifically and not jump into the comic book stuff and mangas because it gets a little too dicey there. Although I will pull up some of that story page manga stuff because that does fall into the cartoon continuity of Japanese G1. But there was quite a few weird ones. The one that you mentioned, the Soundwave one, that was a weird one just to kind of start with that because when Transformers was first conceived, and again, communication was so limited back then, especially in like its developments of 83 going into 84, and then the planning of commercials for that product for 84. If you look at the Decepticon lineup for 84, you had a bunch of little small cassettes. You had the mid-size kind of figures and the Seeker Jets of Starscream, Thundercracker, and Skywarp. Then you had that gun guy who had all those little pieces that we know as Megatron. And then the one that was taller than all the bunch was Soundwave. And Soundwave also kind of controlled those cassettes that literally made 50% of the forces of that 1984 toy line. And then on top of that, that Decepticon emblem kind of looked like his face. So to a lot of confused individuals, especially in the marketing area of Hasbro, they thought that Soundwave was the leader. Of course, that would change later on, and they would figure it out. And the funny thing is that it's Optimus Prime was called the Autobot Commander, but Megatron was called the Decepticon Leader. And sometimes he referred to himself in the show as Supreme Leader, and then of course you have Supreme Commander for Optimus Prime and all the other leaders on the Japanese side of thing, and Emperor of Destruction for the Decepticon side, all kinds of different titles. But that's just always a kind of funny thing, and Soundwave kind of just fell into this where it's like, oh yeah, he's the leader for a hot second, at least according to Confusion. Even Jetfire kind of suffered from that too, with some other European stuff, but we'll get into that at another time in the future. We're going to stick just to cartoon stuff today. And we're going to talk about some obscure ones, some ones that happened and almost didn't happen. And one that I want to start with first is after Transformers Zone, Japanese series, we were going to go into Battle Stars. And Battle Stars was going to be the next Transformers series. Transformers was always a little bit on a downturn in terms of ratings and toy sales in Japan. And originally the plan was that the next Autobot or Sabertron leader for the Autobots was going to be a character named Big Bang. And he was going to be this, I swear when you look at him, it's like a fusion of Fire Convoy, Robots in Disguise, Optimus Prime, meets Thunderclash. Like, I feel like the two designs kind of found their place together there. And you could obviously, when you look at it, you could see what kind of later on then became the Thunderclash toy, maybe just through the DNA of it. But this Big Bang character was at one point going to be the leader of the next crew of Autobots, and he was joined by Iron Baron, which later on would become Grandis, and Star Gary, which I'm pretty sure you could take a guess who he became, Sky Gary later on. But in the end, they didn't really go with him as a design in the end because, I mean, sales were down, and Optimus Prime, and this is the longest Optimus Prime has not been leader. Optimus Prime was absent as a leader within the cultural world and the fictional world of Transformers for 4 years. Like, he died in July of 1987 in that Headmasters episode and was absent from Transformers for 4 years. Yeah, okay, well, there was an Optimus Prime looking character in Master Force, which was Ginrai and stuff, but the character of Convoy had been gone all that time. And from 1987 up until his return in Battlestars in June of 1991, he was gone for nearly 4 years. So I guess their logic was, we got to bring Convoy back. We got to market it as Return of Convoy. And that, for the longest time within the Transformer fandom in the early 90s, in the late 90s, we didn't call it Transformers Battlestars. We called it Transformers Return of Convoy or Return of Star Convoy, because that's how the packaging was, I guess, marketed in English to us and our us gaijins who didn't know any better. Because that was the way it was marketed. It was, oh wow, it's the return, and that's why they kind of dropped Big Bang and went with Star Convoy, aka Optimus Prime. But even to mention, also to talk about obscure Autobot leaders, before Optimus Prime returned in Battlestars and became leader of the Autobots again, became Star Convoy, Sky Gary was leader of the Autobots for a hot minute. Like, it's like Diatlas was the leader, and then at some point Sky Gary became Supreme Commander and was leader of the Battlestars and the Autobots until they found the body of Convoy, used the Zodiac energy mixed with the Matrix of leadership, and we have Star Convoy. And he became the leader of the Autobots and pretty much held on to that pretty firm from that point on, outside of obviously Beast Wars and little things here and there. But a Convoy that looked like an Optimus Prime would stay leader and be leader from that point on in a lot of ways through the next pieces of fiction. Staying on the track of Battlestars, the flip side of that, another obscure Decepticon leader, or weird origins, was the character of Dark Nova. And when that one was kind of first introduced to us in fiction, there was this whole suggestion that he might be like the reborn Unicron. Where did he come from? He has these abilities to resurrect people and then reformat them, which was very Unicron in kind of style, especially back then when there wasn't much fiction to kind of pull by. So it's like, oh, he's kind of like Unicron, and then he could merge with Megatron, and he had this weird transformation that wasn't shown outside of a few like catalog pages. Had a very weird explanation, and then he was kind of even destroyed like Unicron from the inside out, and we didn't learn much about him. Couple of story pages, one-shot manga, not much was known about him. Years later, Sakamoto would flesh out his story and explain that, oh yeah, Dark Nova, he was part of the VOC, and the VOC, using the face of Unicron to kind of invoke fear, and how that was used both in that one piece of catalog fiction that kind of made that confusion to begin with, combined with the fact that that's something that was done in Beast Wars. And Sakamoto's always really good at filling in all the plot holes that exist in Transformers, and he's one of those guys that has a very good breast and knowledge of all the deep and obscure fiction of Transformers and making sense of it. And that's what we love, Sakamoto. We love him to death. But yeah, that's another one. Another weird one was always Dark Nova, and really, outside of Sakamoto's stuff that he did, hasn't really been, visited since. We could jump into even, another case of a leader that we would have gotten and ended up not getting, and then getting another leader instead of, 1992, which I've said many times is one of the worst years for Transformers in terms of fiction being put out, toys being put out. And again, there was this plan to have this new leader called Hyperdrive. And Hyperdrive was supposed to be this Turbo Master character. And again, if you look at Hyperdrive, just like I said before, even with the case of Big Bang, you could see, some of Thunderclash is kind of rumbling in there. And mixed with, in this case, it's like Thunderclash meets Starsaber in a lot of ways. But transformation completely different, but you could see similar kind of ideas with the alt mode and everything. And Hyperdrive ended up not being used as the leader, although the early planning of Hyperdrive still existed. When you look at the little mega visor inside Skyquake's toy, you could actually see this little lens which has a picture of a character in there, and that is Hyperdrive, his little art. So that wasn't removed from the final product. And then, of course, Hyperdrive would get released. It wouldn't get released, and then the character of Thunderclash would be made later for 1992. But Thunderclash was never brought over to Japan, was never established as the leader of the Autobots. So ultimately, in the end, the leader of the Autobots during that period of time, known as the ever obscure and very limited in terms of fiction, known as Operation Combination, the end of Generation 1, we ended up with this kind of pseudo supreme commander of the Autobots in the name of Guard City, which was just a repaint of Defensor and to protect the bots, and that's it. And I mean, me personally, I remember when, back in the day, Proto Man in college, when this knowledge was becoming more prevalent and known in 2000 and 2001 of our time here, I used to kind of always look at it like, okay, Guard City was the leader, but more specifically of that combined team, Fire Chief, who was the centerpiece of Guard City, aka the red repaint of Hotspot. He's the true leader of the Autobots at this point. And then I kind of was like, in my fanon in my mind, I was like, okay, maybe Fire Chief is Fire Convoy and Street Star, which was the Streetwise repaint. Maybe that's Mach Alert, and maybe this is all, after Operation Combination, we go into Car Robots, and that's a bridge series into G2. Just me trying to figure out where Car Robots fit at the time, because to be fair, we didn't have any major continuity ideas back then, especially in 2000, 2001. Now it's all fit in much better, but back then. So, Guard City was another weird one. Another weird one, too. Another leader for a quick second, and then that was that. And, we had Skyquake, also known as Scratch, as he was imported over there, and he was a weird Decepticon leader that we didn't see much of. So, again, it was 92. 92 was that bad year for Transformers, where not a lot of product was coming out, very little fiction. It was just the driest, quietest year for Transformers. 93 would begin G2, and we would have more of that. But it was a really rough year for Transformers back in 92. And Guard City, unfortunately, was kind of part of that. The last one that we're going to get into is weird Decepticon leaders that predate Megatron, like you wanted to know. The Autobot side one is very interesting, and I kind of want to save that for the future because it's a deep forest to go into. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with that and character models, but the good thing with the Decepticon side is we kind of learned that, everyone's all in one shot except for like one guy, because you have Megatron was the leader of the Decepticons. Before that, there was a character named Tranus. Tranus was shown in a flashback scene in Five Faces of Darkness Part 4, and he literally is just like a purpley, kind of repaint, a Decepticon purpley kind of repaint of a Junkion design, which Season 3 was notorious for recycling character models and stuff like that and making them new characters. So you had Tranus, and, maybe one day he'll get a toy. They'll take one of those Junkion molds and make Tranus. That'd be kind of cool. Hey, Mark, you listening? Make that happen. But then when you get to the other Decepticon leaders that come before Tranus, and that, I guess, the first Cybertronian War, the second Cybertronian War, Optimus Prime refers to the Great War that the cartoon is as the third Cybertronian War. They're all in one shot, and we saw them all in the 86 movie. And that was the Great Hall of Heroes, or the Hall of Villains, however you would want to refer to it as, but the Great Hall of Heroes, where all the Decepticons were when Starscream got melted by Galvatron, and his coronation. And they're all there, and all of these were, they're all named characters, named by Fleur O'Deary, the, character designer and creator of most of the 86 product and 87 onward. So you have Flowron, who, again, you're going to have Flowron and Deary, which is pretty much Fleur O'Deary, just naming himself after two of those Decepticon characters. You have Murderon, you have Gulon, you got Bloodron, you got Gladiron, you got Devron, and those ones were all ones that were named, and we have images to go with them, and we know which statues they were. And then there's a bunch of statues that we don't know what the names are applied to, because there was also Rapiron, Canabaron, and Panoy. The last one is kind of like Panoy. He doesn't sound like all the others. Panoy is actually slang to refer to someone who's Filipino, and Fleur O'Deary's Filipino. So he just wanted to name one. We don't know who those three are. I'd like to believe that of the ones that we don't have designs for, I like to believe that Rapiron, rapier maybe, like a sword, maybe he's the pointing one. And I'm going to say Panoy is the one that has the that little cape there and the little popped collar, just to make it look cool. And Canabaron is, I don't know, is that guy over there. Like, I'm just going to post images of the ones that aren't picked of the statues, but we'll see. I don't know. They never been fleshed out, but there's more characters that if ever Hasbro wants to dive into and make brand new toys of obscure characters, there's a whole bunch of them right there, and make alt modes and stuff. Whole bunch of gold repaints, although you have to give them original colors. And the last one we're going to cover, we'll just cover one that a lot of people, they know the name, but they don't know its cartoon kind of origins. I mean, it originally came from the comics, is Sentinel Prime. And Sentinel Prime, as a cartoon Autobot leader, there was many Autobot leaders, but we'll just mention Sentinel Prime quickly. Sentinel Prime was also an Autobot leader. He was the one who got taken out and then by Megatron, and then he gave the Matrix to Alpha Trion, who would then one day give it to Orion Pax that would become Optimus Prime. So there's also Sentinel Prime. And that's one, honestly, out of everything we discussed here today, I would love to see a Sentinel Prime toy be made. That design's interesting. We know what the alt mode looks like. We know what the robot mode looks like. It looks like it's doable. It's not like a crazy, impossible kind of Getter Robo kind of transformation. It looks like it's something that could be made into a toy. And it's a trademark that they have. So if they want to keep that trademark alive, they have an easy Sentinel Prime they could attach it to, and you can get an obscure character. And it's a Prime character, and they always like to put a Prime character every so often. I could see him being done as a Voyager, coming with his Gladiator weapons. I dig it. I think it looks cool, and it'd be a fun one. But I hope that answers some of it. There's a few that keep you satiated, and you could go through the history of that. I feel there's still so much more to cover, but there's a lot of really cool ones right there, and there's way more. Again, almost all of it is in that early G1 bubble. 83 pre-production into about, I want to say, like 91, 92. That first era of Generation 1 stuff. There's all these weird leaders and ideas that didn't happen, and everything started to become way more consistent and straight by the time you get to G2, Beast Wars, and afterwards. Transformers was still trying to find itself back then, so that's kind of why so much of those kind of spawned from there, and why still a lot of them we know so little about, and why we try our best, even like here on the podcast, to kind of bring light to them and make sense of what they are. But again, thank you, Space Ghostal, for the listener question. I hope that it was entertaining and fun for everybody. And if you want to be like Space Ghostal and ask a Patreon listener question, or you just want to support the podcast, have your name in the credits and say, hey, Proto, I like what you do. Again, patreon.com/Protoman, or check the pinned comment or the description below. And like I always say, rock out with the robots in disguise.